I'm going to be working a little bit more with the pad here. So I'm just going to have him come to the pad and touch it, and then put it back on his back. Backwards, unfortunately. There we go. And this session, I really wanted to work on having him yield his hindquarters over and then taking it off from there. So that's what we're working on. He thinks come to me. There we go. And then as he's moving those hindquarters over, I want to click and then pull off the pad. So what we're trying to do here is get like a take this off button kind of. So the opposite of like a start button and end button, I guess. So I'm asking him to come over to the pad and touch it, and then we'll go ahead and put it on. And I'm just going to reinforce the standstill. So again, we don't want to get him to anticipate and like always yield his hindquarters. That's not exactly what we're looking for. He's thinking about going forward because we worked on that before, but I want him to take a step over. I'm going to click, take the pad off, and then feet. So that's kind of what we're trying to do, is like an end signal here. I've learned that from Mustang Maddie. She has a really good course on that, and I wanted to play with that with Atlas because I think that would be very useful for him. So if he just kind of yields his hindquarters, I'll take the pad off, I'll take the saddle off, I'll get off, that kind of thing, so that they can kind of tell you when they're starting to get worried versus going forward or bucking or doing something else. So that's what we're playing with today with the pad. So I really want him to, like, if he would feel tight, he can kind of just go into that. And I need to work on kind of explaining that to him. So through different parts of the training, like right now, I'm just asking him to do it with the target, just so that he could tell like this is one of the options. Is okay. Sometimes you yield your hindquarters and then the pad comes off. I just want him to know that yield hindquarters, pad comes off. I want to kind of connect those two things, and then throughout the other training, let's say we're just walking forward around the round pen, he gets tight, I can ask for the hindquarter yield, take the pad off, and give him a break, and kind of incorporate that in the training, just kind of see if that starts to make sense to him. So this one, I think he's just thinking to go forward because that's what we had been working on last time. I don't really think that there's any worry in there. He seems totally fine. I think he's just doing what he thinks I want him to do. So we're just line him back up, put the pad back on. I just need to be a little bit more clear with my target and showing him what it is that I want. So what I'm looking for right now is the standstill. So last time that I put the pad on, he immediately wanted to go walk off. So let's do the opposite and make sure he can stand still and relax, throw the pad off, and it hits the cones and stuff, and he's totally cool with that. So I want to work on that as well, just like I talked about in the last video. I want to make sure that he's not anticipating and connecting when the pad goes on. I just go forward. I don't want that. So start button, pop it on, put it on his neck, move it around. I want to make sure he's cool with all of that. I want him to wait too. This looks really good. Reinforce that, because again, I don't want him thinking pad on, go forward, but I also don't want him to think when I hold on to the strap on the pad that he has to go forward as well. So those little body language things that we might not pay attention to, they do, and they might inadvertently become cues that we're not aware of. And then we're like, well, what is this horse doing? Why is he doing it? And it was like, they're just paying attention to something and we're not. So I'm going to put it on his hindquarters and just make sure he's cool with it on different places, fall off the back, just do a little bit of him staying still and getting used to the pad. So that's a good thing to do. Just periodically, there kind of touch his hind leg. Sometimes he doesn't necessarily like having stuff on his hind legs, so it's a good exercise for him. He doesn't necessarily like walking over it as well. So things like that. But if you notice like your horse is anticipating a little bit and going forward, or you're just too much forward, let's do the opposite and let's work on things that are standing still, and vice versa. So just always balancing stuff out. So now he stands still for a while. Now I'm asking him to go forward and then throw the pad off on the ground, kind of. Um, but I want him to get used to that as well. So last session we worked on pulling the pad, or walking with the pad, and now we're going to do pulling the pad off while he's moving. It's just another little element of that. And if everything has been done in little steps and successfully, it shouldn't be a big deal, just like it is here. Like he's going forward, pad falls off, and he just stops. That's, see how he stopped right before that, but we're kind of working up to that point. I think we've already done that with Caster at this point, but another skill that I'd like him to have is when the pad falls off, when the saddle falls off, if I fall off, I want him to stop. So by in order to teach him to do that is pad falls off and he stops. Like pad falls off, I click and he stops. And then he'll just start like associating that when the pad falls off, if I stop, and then I'll get a click and a treat. So it's pretty simple association, but it works pretty well. So I'll go the other way. Stand still for a while before we go forward. Reinforcing for that. I was moving the pad around. All that looks great. Throw it on the ground. Perfect. Love all that stuff. Let him touch it is our start button. Pop it on. Reinforce for just staying still. Then we'll go ahead and go forward. Now this is just, we're just taking the pad off and then feeding. So we're throwing it on the ground instead. Now, like, since the last session where I was a little bit more gentle with it, now I'm just going to throw it on the ground a little bit more. Okay, put the pad back on. Like that, he's not anticipating. Oh, maybe a little bit. So we'll just work on standing still then. Good, so reinforce him for staying still. He thought about going forward, then he stopped. So it's just really important to pay attention to the body language. Even that little step, like then when he stops and he stands still, I want to reinforce that. Because then that was the thought of going forward, and then he thought, oh, maybe not. Because I don't want him going forward off cue. He's ready for that. He's further along in his training, so that's not a foreign thing for him. So I'm just going to be a little bit more, I guess, aggressive with throwing the pad off. A little more intense, I guess. Like throwing it off further, to throw it off the other side. Just kind of not worrying as much about it. I want to start a little bit small because I do want him to get used to it, but I don't want to get too crazy in the beginning. So there, kind of flies off to the side, hits the cones, falls on the ground. And I especially want him to get used to things falling on his legs, in front of him, behind him, under him. That's probably the most important stuff. Just get him used to having it on his neck. And that's also going to prepare him for if he were to wear a winter blanket with a neck piece, just having me on his neck, different stuff. So just a good task, or a good thing for him to know. Putting the pad on in different areas is important as well. You don't want to get stuck and the pad goes on the back right behind the withers all the time, and then for some reason it blows off or it slides down or whatever, and then he's scared of it. Specifically on a Mustang, sometimes they don't generalize super well, especially in the beginning. He did not generalize at all. It was very specific. I can do this behavior in this context and this context only. So it's really important with these guys to make sure that they're cool with all these different little changes. And then until they trust you. So like if someone else did this would also be different. So it's also important that I have someone else come in and do the same thing. So it's not just me. It's a lot of different people, but it's kind of along the same lines there. But it's important that the pad goes on his neck, the pad goes on his hindquarters, the pad slides back. So it's not always in this one spot, even though I'm never gonna obviously tack him up with the pad on his neck, but I want to make sure that that's something he's okay with. So now we're up to a few steps there. That looks great. He's really willing to go forward. So it doesn't look tense at all. Looks great. Ask him to touch it. We'll do our start button. Reinforce him for staying still. Ask him to go forward. That looks great. Clicking as he's going forward, then throwing the pad off and feeding. I also like to use that pad as a target, like how you follow a target. So that's another thing that we can do that builds up some confidence as well. This looks good. Ask him to heel his hindquarters a little bit. Perfect. So we're kind of adding in those two things. So we did some hindquarters from the standstill, then we did some walking forward, and now we're kind of adding those together. So can you walk forward and then yield your hindquarters? And later on, we can add a voice cue to that behavior, the hindquarter yield. We could add in a neck rope cue, a rein cue. So this is just the very beginning of it.
Okay. Good.
And then
Over.
I'll ask him to yield the hindquarters.
Good.
Fantastic. Pull the pad off. That was beautiful.
Good boy. That was fantastic.
So he's really
Buddy.
getting it. He's really connecting the two together and making great progress.
Awesome.